This is a story about a mother's grief that turned into cold-blooded revenge, about a woman driven to despair by the inaction of the law who decided to take justice into her own hands. Today, our program covers the shocking events of the summer of 1998 that took place in a remote village in the Kirov region. What drives a mother to take a knife in her hands and go against those whom the whole village fears? And where is the line between revenge and justice when the justice system remains silent? We will show you everything as it was, without embellishment or censorship. The summer of 1998 was hot and restless in the Kirov region. In a small working-class village lost among forests and swamps, time seemed to have stopped along with the horn of the town's main factory, which had fallen silent 5 years earlier. Life here followed its own unwritten laws. Once a month, an old UAZ van with the police would stop by to file a report on a drunken brawl or petty theft, turn around and leave, leaving the village alone with its own demons. And there were plenty of demons. Unemployment, widespread drunkenness, and a sense of complete hopelessness gave rise to several gangs of ex-convicts and embittered youth who kept everyone who had not yet managed to escape from here in fear. They were a shadow government, feared more than the official law. In this world, as sticky as a swamp, lived 42-year-old Galina Korotkova with her only daughter, 17-year-old Svetlana. Galina was a quiet woman, but with a strong inner core. Life had not been kind to her. Her husband had died tragically on a construction site almost 10 years ago, leaving her alone with a small child. She worked 2 jobs, during the day as a cleaner at a local school, and in the evenings at a tiny shop on the outskirts of the village. She poured all her energy and all her unspent love into Svetlana. The girl was her pride and joy, and the only meaning in her life. Beautiful and intelligent, she dreamed of escaping this backwater, enrolling in a teacher training college in Kirov, and becoming a teacher. Galina saved every penny for her future, denying herself everything. They lived in a small 2-room apartment in an old 5-story panel building, and their modest life was filled with warmth and mutual understanding, rare for these parts. On that fateful July evening, a disco was held in the old house of culture in the village, a rare event for the local youth. Sveta begged her mother for a long time to let her go. Galina felt an inexplicable anxiety, but looking into her daughter's shining eyes, she could not refuse. "Mommy, I won't be long. Just dancing with my friends and then back. I'll be home at 10, I promise," Svetlana chirped, trying on a new dress that Galina had been saving up for 3 months. Galina walked her to the door, reminding her for the 100th time to be careful and not to stay out late. Time passed. The hands on the old wall clock showed 11, then midnight, but Svetlana was still not home. Galina's heart sank with a sense of foreboding. She began calling her daughter's friends, but no one knew anything. Svetlana had left the disco around 10, saying she was going home. Galina threw on an old jacket and ran out into the street. The village's dark streets were deserted and eerie. She walked around the entire neighborhood, reached the house of culture, where the lights had long since gone out, and called her daughter until she was hoarse, but only silence and the barking of stray dogs answered her. In the morning, sleepless and mad with fear, she ran to the police station in a neighboring, larger village. The tired police officer listened to her confused story, yawning, reluctantly accepted her statement, and said matter-of-factly, "Don't worry so much, citizen. She's probably just a young girl out having fun. She'll turn up. Maybe she's gone to the city to meet some boyfriend." These words, spoken with indifferent confidence, were the first blow to Galina. She realized that there was no one to help her. No one would look for her daughter. The search turned into Galina's personal hell. She quit her job and spent whole days combing the surrounding forests, questioning the rare passers-by who shied away from her frantic gaze. Some neighbors shook their heads sympathetically. Others looked away. Fear gripped the village. Everyone knew that a group of local thugs had been at the disco that evening. 3 recently released repeat offenders who had long terrorized the entire neighborhood. People had seen them following Sveta closely, making dirty jokes, but no one spoke openly about it. They were afraid. Galina went from house to house, looked people in the eyes, begged them to tell her anything, but was met with a wall of silence. Hope faded with each passing hour, and a week later, the worst happened. A local mushroom picker, who had gone into the forest behind the village, stumbled upon a body barely covered with earth and branches. It was Sveta. She was torn, bruised all over her body, and her clothes were torn. An examination later confirmed that the girl had been brutally raped and then strangled. For Galina Korotkova, her world collapsed in an instant. When she was told about the discovery, she did not scream or cry. She fell silent. Her face turned into a frozen mask of grief, and her eyes, once full of warmth, froze into cold, dead ice. At the identification, she looked at what was left of her daughter, and at that moment, something inside her broke irrevocably. Hope died, and something else was born in its place. Something dark, cold, and merciless. Svetlana's funeral took place 3 days after the identification. The entire village came to the small weed-covered cemetery on the outskirts. People stood with their eyes downcast, shifting from foot to foot. The air was filled not only with the smell of incense and freshly dug earth, but also with a sticky, universal fear. No one dared to look Galina in the eye, but everyone stole glances at the 3 figures standing at a distance by the old cemetery fence. It was them. 28-year-old Sergei Voronov, nicknamed Voron, 3 times convicted of robbery and grievous bodily harm. His peer, Alexei Lyutov, or simply Lyuty, who was as big and dumb as a log, and the youngest of them, the 19-year-old restless Pavel Chibisov, known as Chibis. They did not hide. They stood there, smoking brazenly, exchanging short phrases and watching the procession with smirks. Their presence was a slap in the face to the entire village, a demonstration of complete impunity. Galina stood by the fresh grave like a stone statue. She did not shed a single tear. Her dry, wide-open eyes stared into the void, and her thin lips were pressed into a single white line. When clods of earth thudded onto the lid of the cheap pine coffin, something changed in her gaze. A dark, focused determination replaced the cold emptiness. That day, she buried not only her daughter, but also her former life, her faith in people, and justice. A couple of days after the funeral, an investigator from the district center came to her house. Captain Maltsev, a man in his 50s with a tired, puffy face and the smell of stale alcohol. He sat down in the kitchen, leafed through the case file for a long time, and asked formal questions to which he already knew the answers. Galina answered in monosyllables, never taking her eyes off his hands. He did not look her in the eye. "You see, Galina Petrovna," he finally began with a heavy sigh, "your village is unique. We have no direct evidence against Voronov and his company. No one saw anything. No one heard anything. The fingerprints at the crime scene have been smudged. There are no witnesses. They have a solid alibi. They allegedly spent the whole night drinking at the other end of the village, and a dozen people will confirm this. It's understandable that they're afraid, but testimony is testimony." He paused and took out a cigarette. "We will, of course, continue to work on it, but frankly speaking, the prospects are unclear. The case will most likely be shelved." He looked at her for the first time, and in his gaze she saw not sympathy, but rather advice. Accept it. Forget it. Don't get involved. Otherwise, it will only get worse. When he left, leaving behind the smell of tobacco and hopelessness, Galina finally understood. No one would help. No one would punish anyone. The system that was supposed to protect her had admitted its own powerlessness, and in essence, its cowardice. The days that followed merged into one gray, lingering nightmare. Galina did not leave the apartment. She sat for hours in Sveta's room, sorting through her things: school notebooks with neat handwriting, cheap jewelry in a box, photographs of her girl laughing. The silence was maddening. The apartment used to be full of life: Svetlana's voice, music from her tape recorder, their evening conversations over tea. Now there was a ringing emptiness, saturated with grief. But it wasn't just grief. Inside Galina, in the depths of her scorched soul, another feeling was growing and strengthening, cold as steel. It was hatred, pure, distilled, unclouded by fear or doubt. She knew who had done it. The whole village knew. And the thought that these monsters walked the earth, breathed the same air, laughed and drank vodka, while her daughter lay in a damp grave, was unbearable. It became a knife that was slowly twisted in her heart. And one night, she made a decision. If the law were dead, then she would have to take justice into her own hands. This thought brought her a strange, chilling sense of calm. For the first time in many days, she slept, and in the morning, she woke up a different person. Galina began to act methodically, with a coolness she did not expect from herself. She knew she had no room for error. First thing in the morning, she went back to the woods. She crawled on her knees around the spot where they had found Sveta, raking through the rotten leaves and soil inch by inch. The police had conducted a perfunctory search, and Galina understood that, and she saw it. Under the root of an old oak tree, where it had apparently been kicked, lay a cigarette butt. It was an expensive cigarette by local standards, the kind that only one person in their village smoked, Voron. He always boasted that he didn't smoke cheap primas, but imported cigarettes that were brought to him from the city. And nearby, caught on a branch of a bush, hung a small button in the shape of a ladybug, from Sveta's blouse, from the very same new blouse she wore to the disco. Galina clenched these tiny pieces of evidence in her fist. This was her own, irrefutable proof. Then she began to observe. She turned into a shadow. Wearing an old dark coat and tying a scarf around her head so that it hid half of her face, she sat for hours on a bench in the far corner of the park, from where she could clearly see the only bar in the village, a dirty dive called Vistrecha, the meeting. That was where the trio gathered every evening. She studied their habits, what time they arrived, how much they drank, who they talked to, and where they went afterwards. She found out that after the bar closed, they often wandered into an abandoned hangar on the grounds of a former factory, where they continued drinking cheap port wine until morning. No one dared to disturb them. The hangar was their lair. One day, she decided to take another step. She waited for Katya, Sveta's best friend, at the entrance. The girl turned pale when she saw Galina and tried to slip past her, but Galina blocked her way. She didn't shout or beg. She just took her by the hand and looked into her eyes with her new dead gaze. "Katya, I know you're afraid, but tell me the truth, for Svetlana's sake." The girl began to shake, burst into tears, and whispered everything through her tears. How Voron, Liuti, and Chibis had harassed Svetlana all evening, grabbing her by the arms, and when she tried to go home, they followed her. Katya and her friends wanted to go with her, but Liuti barked at them so fiercely that they ran away in fear. They dragged her toward the forest. She screamed. "And we were scared, Aunt Galia. We were so scared," whispered the girl, choking back tears. Galina listened silently. Every word was a hammer forging her determination. She let go of the girl's hand and said only one thing: "Be quiet. Don't say a word to anyone, just like before." And she left, leaving the frightened Katya sobbing on the staircase. Now she had everything: confidence, a motive, and a plan. In the old medicine cabinet left behind by her late husband, who had suffered from heart disease, she found what she was looking for: several blister packs of clonidine. Her husband had been prescribed it for high blood pressure, but he hardly ever took it, complaining that it made him drowsy. Now, this medicine was to serve its last purpose. Galina carefully squeezed out all the pills, crushed them into powder, and poured them into a small paper bag. She was ready. All that remained was to choose the time. On Friday evening, Galina Korotkova was transformed. She washed the frozen mask of grief from her face, painted her lips with bright, provocative lipstick that she hadn't used in 20 years, and put on an old but once elegant dress that seemed foreign and inappropriate on her. She looked at her reflection in the cracked hallway mirror and did not recognize herself. An unfamiliar aged woman with a feverish gleam in her eyes and a predatory evil smile on her lips was staring back at her. This was not Galina Korotkova, the grief-stricken mother. It was an instrument of revenge. She put a paper bag with white powder and a bottle of the cheapest vodka she had bought the day before at the hardware store into an old suitcase. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she returned to the kitchen. From the desk drawer, she took out a long, well-sharpened kitchen knife, which she usually used to cut meat. She wrapped it in a rag and hid it in the bag. Her hands did not tremble. Inside her, there was a ringing, arctic cold. She locked the door of the apartment, where her daughter's laughter would never be heard again, and without looking back, stepped into the night darkness of the village. The doors of the Vstrecha bar opened with a nasty creak, letting her into a cloud of tobacco smoke, the smell of stale alcohol, and sour beer. Cheap pop music blared hoarsely from old speakers. Sullen men and loose women, their faces already marked by despair, sat at sticky tables. Galina paused for a moment in the doorway, letting her eyes adjust to the dim light. She saw them immediately. Voron, Liuti, and Chibis were sitting at their usual table in the corner, laughing loudly and drinking beer from cloudy mugs. Galina took a deep breath and, taking each step carefully, headed straight for them. Her appearance was like a bomb going off. The conversations at the neighboring tables died down. Everyone stared at her. The quiet widow Korotkova, who had buried her daughter just a week ago, and now came to the village's main den of iniquity in battle paint. The trio also fell silent, staring at her in surprise. Voron was the first to recover. "Wow, what a bunch of people," he drawled with a cheeky grin. "Petrovna, what are you doing here? Decided to commemorate your daughter?" Liuti and Chibis cackled nastily. Galina approached their table and stopped. She looked Raven straight in the eye, and there was no fear or grief in her gaze, only cold, contemptuous curiosity. "It's boring, guys," she said unexpectedly in a firm, deep voice. "It's dreary being home alone, and I see you're having fun here." They clearly did not expect such a response. Voron frowned, trying to figure out what was going on. He was used to everyone fearing her, pitying her, avoiding her. And here she was, standing in front of him, her chin raised defiantly. "What do you want, Petrovna?" he asked, now more cautiously. Galina glanced at their table, where the mugs were empty. "I see you're out of beer, and drinking this local swill is disrespectful. I have some good stuff with me. White stuff," she said, patting her bag demonstratively. "Would you like some? Just not here. It's noisy and smelly here." There were notes in her voice that any man in their position would consider an invitation. A lonely 40-year-old woman, clearly driven by grief, was throwing herself at them. It was too strange to be true, but too tempting to refuse. Voron exchanged glances with his friends. Their dull faces reflected greed and lust. They saw before them not an avenger, but easy prey, a strange entertainment for the evening. "And you, Petrovna, you're a lively one, it seems." Voron grinned again, making his decision. "And where are you going to treat us? Will you invite us to your place?" Galina smiled. "I won't invite you to my place. I don't want to tarnish the memory of my daughter. But I know a quiet place where no one will disturb us. It's in an old factory, in a hangar. You've been there, haven't you?" This phrase finally convinced them of her intentions. She knew their place. So, she had been watching them. So, she wanted to. They got up from the table, paid the bill, surrounded Galina, and headed for the exit. The whole bar watched them with bewildered looks. No one understood what was happening, but everyone sensed that something terrible was brewing. They walked through the dark streets of the village. Voron walked ahead, waving his arms, and Liuti, reeking of sweat and cheap beer, trudged along beside Galina. Chibis trailed behind, giggling nervously. They made lewd jokes and tried to put their arms around her shoulders, but Galina silently and firmly pushed their hands away. She didn't talk, saving her strength, and only pointed the way, even though they knew it perfectly well themselves. The abandoned factory greeted them with silence and decay. The broken windows of the workshops were black as empty eye sockets. The huge echoing hangar was dark and cold. Liuti lit a kerosene lamp standing on a rusty barrel, and its dim light revealed mountains of scrap metal, old machines covered with a thick layer of dust, and a dirty mattress in the corner. Galina put her bag on the barrel and took out a bottle of vodka and 3 plastic cups, which she had thoughtfully brought from home. "What about you, Petrovna?" Voron asked. "I've already had mine," she replied hollowly. She turned her back to them, pretending to take a simple snack out of her bag, bread and salted cucumbers. At that moment, covering her actions with her body, she poured white powder from a bag into 3 cups. Her hands moved quickly and precisely. She poured vodka to dissolve the powder and handed the cups to the men. "Well, here's to our meeting," said Voron, and they drank in one gulp without clinking glasses. Galina watched as their Adam's apples bobbed as they swallowed the poison. Now all that remained was to wait. She sat down on a box off to the side and watched silently. At first, they perked up, starting to tell dirty jokes again and discuss their exploits. But after 10 minutes, their speech began to slur. Chibis was the first to float. He tried to stand up, but his legs buckled and he collapsed like a sack onto the dirty floor. Liuti stared at him blankly, then at Galina. "What did you slip into his drink, witch?" he croaked, but couldn't finish. His eyes rolled back, and he fell heavily onto his side. Voron held out the longest. He understood what had happened, and animal terror appeared in his eyes. He tried to jump up, to reach Galina, but his body no longer obeyed him. "For Svetka, you creature," he wheezed before his head hit the iron barrel with a crash. Silence reigned in the hangar, broken only by their heavy, ragged breathing. Galina slowly got up and walked over to them. 3 mighty, fearsome beasts that had terrorized the entire village now lay at her feet, helpless as newborn kittens. She looked at their faces, the insolent face of Voron, the dull face of Liutoi, the frightened face of Chibis. There was neither pity nor satisfaction in her soul, only an icy emptiness and a sense of duty fulfilled. She took a knife out of her bag. The dim light of the kerosene lamp reflected off its sharp blade. Galina acted without haste, like a surgeon in an operating room. Her movements were precise and economical. She felt neither disgust nor fear, only a dull, all-consuming emptiness and a single thought. This is for Sveta. She dragged the lifeless bodies one by one to the center of the hangar and laid them side by side on the dirty concrete floor. Voron was first. She looked at his relaxed, lifeless face, frozen in a shadow of horror, and did not see a human being. He was a beast who had torn her child apart. The knife entered his heart easily, with almost no resistance. Then she did the same to Liut and Chibis. None of them moved. None of them made a sound. They passed from deep sleep into eternal darkness. But that was not all. Her revenge demanded symbolism, a terrible, vivid lesson. She did what was mentioned in the initial report. She committed an act of retribution, cruel and full of primitive, biblical justice. She acted mechanically, as if performing a long memorized task. When it was all over, she accidentally touched the hot glass of the kerosene lamp with her hand. The pain was sharp, but Galina hardly noticed it. She only glanced at the reddening burn on her palm, as if it belonged to someone else. She found a piece of chalk in the corner, walked over to the rusty metal wall of the hangar, and wrote 3 words in shaky but large letters. "This is for her." Then she silently gathered her things: an empty bottle, cups, a rag in which the now blood-stained knife was wrapped, and left the hangar into the pre-dawn fog. She returned to her empty apartment, carefully washed the knife, burned the rag in the ashtray, and lay down on the bed without undressing. For the first time in many weeks, she did not see the face of her tormented daughter before her eyes. There was absolute, ringing silence in her head. The terrible discovery was made only 2 days later. 2 local boys, searching for scrap metal, wandered into the abandoned hangar. A child's scream, full of genuine horror, shattered the morning silence of the village and signaled the beginning of the final chapter of this tragedy. Within an hour, almost the entire town had gathered at the hangar. People stood silently, afraid to come close, but unable to leave. Captain Maltsev, who arrived this time not alone, but with an entire task force, turned green when he saw the scene inside, and went outside to smoke a cigarette with trembling hands. The sight was monstrous even for seasoned police officers. 3 dead bodies, the nature of the injuries, the inscription on the wall. All this added up to a clear and frightening picture of a ritual massacre. The investigation was surprisingly short. In a village where everyone knew each other, there were no secrets. Dozens of eyes saw Galina Korotkova going to the bar that evening. The bartender confirmed on record that she had sat down with the trio and taken them with her. One of the neighbors, an elderly woman who had insomnia, saw Galina return home in the early morning. Black as dirt. The motive was as clear as day. The final piece of the puzzle was a visit to the local doctor, whom Galina visited the day after the murder to treat a severe burn on her hand. She said she had burned herself on a teapot. But now, this detail has become key evidence. When they came for her, Galina was sitting in the kitchen drinking cold tea. She was not surprised. She calmly stood up when they showed her the arrest warrant and quietly said, "I'm ready." During the interrogation, she did not deny anything. She sat opposite Captain Maltsev, the same one who had advised her to accept her fate, and in a monotonous, lifeless voice, told him everything as it had happened. She did not justify herself or express remorse. Her story lacked emotion. It was a report on the work she had done. "I knew they wouldn't be imprisoned," she said, looking the investigator straight in the eye with her empty gaze. "I could see it in your eyes. I knew they would continue to walk the streets, laughing and drinking vodka, and my daughter would lie in the ground. I just did what I had to do as a mother." She described in detail how she met them in a bar, how she brought them to the hangar, how she gave them vodka laced with clonazepam, and how she killed them. Her composure frightened experienced investigators more than the details of the murder itself. She did not seem insane. She seemed like a person who had crossed a line and would never return. Galina Korotkova's trial became an event that shook not only the Kirov region, but the entire country. Journalists from central newspapers flocked to the village. The story of the avenging mother spread throughout Russia, which was experiencing turbulent times of lawlessness and gangsterism. For millions of people, Galina became a symbol of popular justice, the last hope in a world where the law was silent. She was called the Mother Wolf and the Angel of Vengeance. Signatures were collected in her support, and letters were written to the editors and the court. Society was divided. Some were horrified by the cruelty of her revenge. Others admired her courage. A forensic psychiatric examination found her to be sane. Still, it was determined that at the time of the crime, she was in a state of severe emotional distress caused by the death of her daughter and the inaction of law enforcement agencies. It was a state of affect that persisted over time. The court, under enormous public pressure and obvious mitigating circumstances, handed down an unprecedentedly lenient sentence. Taking all factors into account, Galina Korotkova was given the minimum possible sentence of 3 years imprisonment in a general regime colony. In the packed courtroom, the verdict was met with applause. After her arrest, a strange, unfamiliar silence fell over the village. The fear that had hung in the air for years disappeared. People became more comfortable going out in the evenings, and mothers stopped worrying about their teenage daughters. The tragedy of Galina and Svetlana Korotkov, like a terrible storm, cleared the atmosphere. Galina served her sentence from bell to bell. She was released as an aged, silent woman. She sold her apartment in the village and left for an unknown destination. No one knows where she is now or what has become of her. Her story has become a dark legend that is still told in the Kirov countryside. It is a legend about a mother's grief, which proved more potent than fear and stronger than the law. It is about the terrible price of justice, sometimes paid when justice is blind and deaf.